Tomorrow morning, you are going to get into your car, pull out of your driveway, and head to work. And at some point, you're likely going to pull up to a red light.
Right.
While you're sitting there, completely stationary, foot resting firmly on the brake pedal, you are probably going to reach down to the cup holder. You'll pick up your phone, wake up the screen, and swipe away a notification. Or maybe just tap once to change the playlist.
Which is something millions of people do every single commute.
Exactly. Last year, that specific motion was just a bad habit. Today, in states rolling out new legislation across the country, that exact motion is a primary legal offense. It will trigger an immediate traffic stop, and it will fundamentally recalibrate your auto insurance premiums within a single billing cycle.
We are looking at a structural, really mechanical shift in the application of traffic law. So the purpose of this deep dive is to map the definitive end of the grace period on hands-free driving.
And we should clarify up front, we are putting aside any moralizing about road safety here.
Right, absolutely. We're ignoring the public relations campaigns. Our focus is strictly on the mechanics of this transition. For this deep dive, we're relying on a stack of specific sources. We've got legal analyses of traffic law evolution, reports on gig economy, behavioral shifts, insurance industry risk scoring metrics, and enforcement data from the 2025 and 2026 state legislative changes.
Yeah, and based on those sources, the entire architecture of the American commute is being aggressively rewritten through one single policy lever, and that lever is the transition from secondary to primary enforcement.
It sounds like a bureaucratic technicality, I know, but it is the invisible mechanism that changes everything about your daily drive.
We need to start by looking at the legal framework itself, because if you don't understand how the state is suddenly authorized to pull you over, the financial fallout later on won't make any sense.
No, it won't. To understand the reality of the road today, we have to look at the era we are abruptly leaving behind. We're leaving behind the era of the buffer. Right. For the better part of a decade, hands-free legislation existed in this state of compromised enforcement. The laws were on the books, but they were severely restricted by the requirement of secondary enforcement.
Meaning the threshold to actually initiate a stop was layered?
Exactly. Under a secondary framework, an officer could look through your window, clearly see you holding a mobile device and typing with your thumbs, and legally, they could not turn on their lights.
Wow, they were just not authorized to intervene based solely on that one observation.
No, they needed a distinct, independent reason to pull you over first. A primary violation. They needed you to physically mismanage the 2-ton vehicle.
Right, like drifting over the yellow line or rolling through a stop sign.
Or traveling 10 miles over the speed limit, or driving with a burned-out taillight. Only after that primary threshold was crossed, only after they established a traditional mechanical reason for the stop, could they approach your window, observe the phone, and add a secondary citation for the device.
I always think about this like a sports referee managing a game. Secondary enforcement is essentially a referee who sees a minor technical penalty. Let's say a player holding an opponent's jersey away from the play.
Right, a clear penalty but minor.
Exactly. The referee sees it happening, but the specific rules of this league dictate that they cannot blow the whistle for that minor infraction alone. They have to wait until a major physical foul occurs, like a late hit or a blatant trip.
And if the major foul happens, they throw the flag and penalize both.
Yes, both the trip and the jersey grab. But if the major foul never happens, the player can just keep grabbing the jersey all game long, entirely unpenalized.
That structural comparison perfectly illustrates the psychological reality for the driving public over the last 10 years. Drivers develop this deeply ingrained, almost subconscious understanding of the buffer.
You understood instinctively that your risk of getting a ticket wasn't tied to the phone in your hand.
Right. Your risk was tied to your lane position and your speedometer. If you could manage the primary parameters of driving, you were completely insulated from the secondary parameters.
Which created a really fascinating mathematical reality. The probability of actually being penalized for holding a phone was incredibly low.
Extremely low. It required the simultaneous occurrence of two totally distinct behaviors. You had to be holding the device, and you had to simultaneously commit a noticeable driving error right in front of a patrol car.
Which brings us to the policy shift driving the 2025 and 2026 legislative waves in places like Michigan, Ohio, Virginia, and Georgia. Primary enforcement dismantles that layered justification.
The buffer is entirely gone. Using your referee analogy, the official no longer waits for the major foul. The minor technical penalty now instantly stops the play on its own.
The act of holding the mobile device is the sole absolute justification required for a police officer to initiate a traffic stop.
Exactly. The behavior inside the cabin is the violation, regardless of the vehicle's position on the road. It lowers the threshold for traffic stops dramatically.
And this completely rewrites the concept of the enforceable moment. This is a phrase that keeps popping up in the legal analyses of these new statutes. Let's break down the math of an enforceable moment under the old system versus the new system.
Sure. An enforceable moment is any distinct second in time where a driver is legally vulnerable to a traffic stop. Under secondary enforcement, an enforceable moment only occurred during a lapse in driving competence.
So if you have a 30-minute commute and you drift over the line once for 3 seconds, you only had 3 enforceable seconds in your entire commute.
Right. And if there was no patrol car present during those specific 3 seconds, your liability was 0.
But primary enforcement alters that math exponentially.
It alters it by orders of magnitude. Under primary enforcement, an enforceable moment occurs every single second that the device is visible in your hand, or resting on your knee, or tucked against your shoulder while the vehicle is in motion.
The threshold for state intervention has essentially dropped from operating heavy machinery improperly to just holding a 6-ounce piece of glass.
Yes. If you hold your phone for 15 minutes of your 30-minute commute, you haven't created 3 enforceable seconds. You have created 900 enforceable seconds. The state has drastically increased the surface area for a citation.
It's a transition from situational risk to constant exposure, but there's a misconception we really need to clear up right now because a lot of people feel like the government is suddenly changing the rules of the game on them.
Yeah, that's a common reaction.
But the legal data is very clear on this point. The so-called grace period that you and I and everyone else enjoyed for the last decade was never actually written into the law.
No, there was never a legislated amnesty for texting and driving. The grace period was a systemic illusion. It was a byproduct of the inherent friction in secondary enforcement.
Because law enforcement agencies are resource constrained.
Highly constrained. When the law requires a cumbersome 2-step process to issue a citation, and officers are dealing with a society where suddenly every single driver has a glowing rectangle in their hand, the system defaults to triage.
Officers frequently chose not to engage with the secondary violation unless the primary driving error was particularly egregious.
Right, it was an institutional hesitation. Regulators and police departments were still trying to figure out how to police a technology that integrated itself into daily life faster than any technology in human history.
And that institutional hesitation bred a cultural assumption. Because you weren't getting pulled over for doing the quick check of your email while coasting down a familiar street, you just assumed the quick check was quietly permitted.
And primary enforcement is the state mathematically ending that ambiguity. By elevating the device violation to a primary trigger, the legislature is signaling to the patrol officer that the friction is removed, and they are signaling to the driver that the grace period is dead.
The law no longer requires a complex sequence of events to justify penalizing you. It only requires a line of sight.
Precisely. A clear line of sight into the cabin.
So if the legal shield is gone, and a police officer only needs to look through your windshield and see the device to turn on the lights, that immediately begs the question, what exactly are they looking for?
That is the critical question.
Because the term hands-free sounds incredibly straightforward. But when you look at the actual statutes and how the courts are interpreting them, the definition of a violation has become absolutely ruthless.
We have to completely discard the historical public awareness campaigns. For years, the messaging on highway billboards and television commercials focused on a single phrase.
Don't text and drive.
Exactly, don't text and drive. And that specific phrasing created a persistent, dangerous liability for the modern driver. It cemented the idea that the standard of law was measuring the nature of your interaction.
You believed that as long as you were not actively using your thumbs to type out a sequence of letters, you were operating within the legal boundary.
Right. You'd think, I'm not texting, I'm just scrolling through my Spotify playlist to find a podcast.
Or, I'm just reading an email and not replying to it. Or even, I'm just holding the phone near my mouth on speakerphone.
Under the new primary enforcement statutes, the standard is no longer not texting. The absolute standard is no physical interaction with a handheld device while operating a vehicle. The law has ceased evaluating the software you are using. It is entirely focused on the hardware.
The text of the legal analysis is unambiguous here. It states, and I quote, "The standard is no handheld interaction. Even brief contact can qualify."
Yeah.
We really need to map out the specific gray areas where drivers miscalculate this new reality, because this is exactly where people are going to get trapped by these laws tomorrow morning. Let's start with the most common piece of infrastructure in a modern car, the dashboard mount.
The dashboard or windshield mount is the required infrastructure for legal phone use under these new regimes. Simply throwing the phone in the passenger seat or the cup holder and glancing down at it is highly risky. The device must be secured in a fixed position.
But simply owning a mount does not buy you immunity.
No, not at all. The critical failure point for the driver occurs in the mid-drive adjustment.
Okay, paint that picture for me. I have my phone locked into a plastic cradle bolted to my air vent. I merge onto the interstate. The sun shifts, and suddenly there is a terrible glare on the screen, and I can't see the map. I reach up with my right hand, grab the edge of the phone, and tilt it down maybe 5 degrees so I can see it.
Under the strictest interpretations of primary enforcement laws, that is an enforceable moment.
Wait, just tilting the screen?
Yes, the device must be secured prior to the vehicle entering the active stream of traffic. Once the vehicle is in motion, the rule prohibits physical manipulation of the device.
So if an officer sees that,
If a patrol officer in the adjacent lane observes your hand leave the steering wheel, extend to the dashboard, and physically manipulate the housing of the device, you have violated the standard. You are no longer hands-free. The fact that the phone was bolted to the car does not negate the fact that your hand interacted with it.
wow, that feels incredibly granular. Let's move to the second major trap outlined in the data, which I guarantee applies to almost every single person driving a car today: the stoplight.
Yes, the stationary trap.
You pull up to a red light, you stop, your foot is firmly planted on the brake pedal, the car isn't moving an inch. You pick up the phone from your lap to quickly check a notification. You see the light turn green, you drop the phone back into your lap, and you hit the gas.
That sequence is a direct violation, and it is perhaps the most heavily enforced scenario in urban jurisdictions right now.
Because the confusion stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal definition of operating a vehicle, right? Drivers equate operation with forward velocity.
Exactly. If the speedometer reads 0, you feel you are not driving.
Because the car is completely stationary.
But the statutes do not define driving solely by forward momentum. The legal definition centers on being in physical control of a vehicle that is part of the active roadway system. If you are stopped at a red light, you are situated in an active traffic lane. The engine is running. The transmission is in drive. You are actively commanding the machine to stay stationary via the brake pedal. You are operating the vehicle.
You are part of the flow of traffic, even if the flow is temporarily paused.
Exactly. Therefore, lifting the device to your line of sight while the light is red is identical, under the law, to holding the device while moving at 60 miles per hour. And because this is now a primary offense, the officer sitting 3 cars back at that same red light requires no other justification.
The moment you pull away on the green light, they will initiate the stop.
Yep, they just flip the lights.
Let's talk about voice commands. Because the automotive industry has spent billions of dollars integrating Bluetooth and voice assistants into cars to supposedly solve this exact problem.
And the analysis confirms that using these integrated systems is perfectly legal. But there is a very sharp dividing line regarding how you wake this system up.
The dividing line is the point of initial physical contact.
Yes. If you press a tactile button integrated into your steering wheel to summon your vehicle's native voice assistant, or if you simply speak a wake word into the open air of the cabin to activate Siri or Google Assistant, you are fully compliant. You have never breached the physical plane between yourself and the mobile device.
But what if I have an older car? I don't have a button on my steering wheel. My phone is sitting in the cup holder, connected to the stereo via a Bluetooth adapter or an auxiliary cable. I look down at the cup holder, I extend my index finger, and I physically press the glass of the phone screen for half a second to wake up Siri so I can dictate a text message using only my voice.
The initial physical contact with the handheld device constitutes a breach of the standard. Even if the subsequent 2 minutes of interaction are entirely voice-driven and you never look away from the road, the initial action of reaching out and tapping the hardware is a violation.
So the law doesn't give you credit for the voice command at all.
No, it penalizes you for the physical tap.
I have to push back on this on behalf of the listener, because when we map out these gray areas, tilting a screen to avoid glare or tapping a piece of glass for half a second to wake up a voice assistant, it feels entirely disconnected from common sense.
I understand why it feels that way.
It feels disconnected from the actual pursuit of safety. Let's take the navigation example. I am driving on a crowded highway. My phone is secured in a mount. Suddenly, my GPS app flashes a bright warning covering the map, telling me there is a massive accident 2 miles ahead, and it offers a faster alternate route. It gives me a large green button that says accept route.
A very common scenario.
Right. And if I ignore it, I drive into a traffic jam. If I want to clear it using my phone's physical side buttons or a complex voice command I haven't memorized, I might have to stare at the screen for 3 seconds, which is dangerous. But if I reach out and tap that green accept button exactly one time in action that takes maybe a third of a second and keeps me moving safely, are we really saying that is a primary legal offense with the same weight as texting a paragraph? How can regulators justify penalizing an action that is arguably the safest way to manage the interface?
They justify it through a profound philosophical shift in how traffic laws are enforced. We really have to look at how the state measures behavior now. The core doctrine here is explicitly stated in the legal analyses. The law is no longer measuring intent. It is strictly measuring action.
Let's really pull that apart. Intent versus action.
Well, in your navigation scenario, your intent is entirely benign and arguably constructive. Your intent is to optimize your route, reduce your time on the highway, and avoid a dangerous traffic jam. You are not intending to distract yourself from the road. You are simply managing a tool to aid your driving.
Right. I'm trying to be a better, safer driver in that specific moment.
Historically, traffic laws were built around evaluating intent and outcome. Think of subjective statutes like careless driving or reckless driving. For an officer to write you a ticket for careless driving, they couldn't just observe a single isolated motion.
They had to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. They had to evaluate your overall behavior, consider the context of the traffic around you, and make a subjective judgment call. Did the driver's action create a tangible danger?
So under the old subjective system, an officer watching me tap the accept route button would evaluate the whole scene. Did that single tap cause my car to swerve? Did I hit the brakes too hard? Did I cut someone off?
Right. And if your car remained perfectly centered in the lane and your speed was constant, the officer's judgment would likely be that no dangerous violation occurred, despite the tap.
Because the outcome was safe.
Yes. That is subjective policing. It relies heavily on the officer's discretion and an evaluation of the driver's intent and competence. The transition to primary enforcement of hands-free laws is the deliberate mechanical removal of subjective policing from this specific behavior. It is a total shift toward rule-based enforcement. The state has drawn a definitive, physical, geographical boundary inside the cabin of your car.
It's essentially a zero-tolerance boundary.
It is entirely binary. The law no longer cares what application you had open. It does not care if you are attempting to route around a traffic jam, or if you were calling an ambulance, or if you were simply liking a photo on social media.
The benign nature of your intent is legally irrelevant.
Irrelevant. The evaluation is strictly mechanical. Did your hand detach from the driving position, cross the spatial boundary of the dashboard, and physically interact with the device?
If the answer is yes, the rule is broken.
If the answer is yes, you have generated an enforceable moment. The state has predetermined, at the legislative level, that the physical act of touching the device is, by definition, the unsafe act. They have removed the officer's burden of proving that your driving was impaired by the touch. The touch itself is the impairment.
This shift from judgment-based behavior to rule-based behavior is why this transition feels so jarring. As drivers, as humans, really, we are accustomed to navigating the world based on our intentions.
We assume our intent matters.
We deeply feel that if we aren't doing anything morally wrong, if we aren't creating a dangerous situation, we shouldn't be penalized by the state. We want a little bit of margin for common sense, but these new laws are actively stripping that margin away. It is not emotional, it is not dramatic, it is just a hard, physical line.
And that hard line was not drawn arbitrarily. Regulators didn't just wake up in 2024 and decide to become uniquely punitive. The legal framework is always a trailing indicator. It always lags behind behavioral reality.
So the behavior forced the issue.
Yes. To understand why this rigid primary enforcement structure is rolling out right now across so many jurisdictions, we have to look at how the reality of the road forced the hand of the state.
Which brings us to the timing of this enforcement wave. Why 2025 and 2026? Smartphones were introduced in 2007. They became ubiquitous by 2012. We have had 15 years of widespread mobile device usage in cars. Why did it take over a decade for the laws to evolve into this ruthless primary enforcement model? What changed the behavioral reality?
The function of the vehicle itself was transformed. To answer the why now, the data points uniformly to a massive economic shift, and that is the explosive rise of the gig economy.
Okay, so rideshare platforms, on-demand food delivery networks.
And app-based logistics, yes, they completely altered the relationship between the driver, the car, and the phone.
Because it wasn't just that the gig economy put tens of thousands of new cars on the road in major metro areas. It fundamentally altered the psychology of what a driver is doing while they are sitting behind the wheel.
Think about the paradigm before the gig economy. If you were driving in 2014 with a smartphone, the device was primarily a passive media player or an intermittent communication tool. You might have your navigation running, or you might be streaming a podcast.
Right. And if you received a text message, it was a distraction, yes. But it was an isolated, episodic distraction. You could choose to ignore it. The core task was driving, and the phone was just an accessory to the trip.
But for a gig worker, that hierarchy is completely inverted. Let's map out the workflow of a modern delivery driver or rideshare operator. Their phone is not an accessory. It is the central nervous system of their labor. It is actively managing their income second by second.
It is a highly dynamic, high-pressure interface. A gig worker is receiving algorithmic dispatch pings that often require acceptance within a 10 to 15-second window, or the job is given to someone else.
They are constantly receiving updated navigation overlays, rerouting them to new surge zones. They are navigating complex apartment complexes while simultaneously texting a customer to get a gate code. They are confirming the drop-off of an order by taking a photograph through the app.
And crucially, almost all of this interaction is happening while the vehicle is in motion or actively navigating the roadway system. The user interface of these apps was designed by tech companies to demand instant physical interaction.
Exactly. The software was built without any regard for the physical safety constraints of a moving vehicle.
The behavioral reports we are examining note that this workflow didn't just increase the raw volume of distracted driving. It normalized it at a massive systemic scale.
When you have millions of drivers whose immediate financial livelihood depends on their physical reflex to a screen prompt while navigating a busy intersection, the baseline behavior of the entire driving public shifts.
The expectation of immediate connectivity, the expectation that a driver is always available to interact with the screen, became the cultural standard.
Yeah.
I look at it through the lens of workspace. For a century, the interior of a car was essentially a transportation pod. But for a gig worker, the car ceased to be a mode of transportation. The car became a mobile office, and the smartphone became the boss.
That's a very accurate way to frame it.
The phone dictates the tasks, measures the efficiency of the routes, and ultimately processes the paycheck. The tension we are seeing right now is that the law is attempting to violently decouple those two spaces. The state is trying to use primary enforcement as a blunt force instrument to smash the mobile office and turn the car back into a transportation pod.
That is the exact friction point. Regulators are trying to force the digital workplace out of the moving machinery, and they're doing it because the macro data accumulated to a point where it could no longer be ignored by the old secondary enforcement models.
You had rising crash data definitively tied to cumulative distraction.
You had immense pressure from the insurance industry, which was bleeding capital on claims costs associated with rear-end collisions and pedestrian impacts. And you had federal safety agencies threatening to withhold highway funding if states didn't standardize their enforcement.
It was a perfect storm of data, but the analyses highlight one final operational catalyst that actually allowed police departments to embrace primary enforcement. It wasn't just the crash statistics, it was the physical reality of the offense itself.
It was visibility.
Visibility is the great accelerant here. To understand this, you have to compare the mechanics of policing a smartphone violation against policing traditional traffic crimes. Think about how much friction is involved in catching a speeding driver.
It's highly labor-intensive. An officer needs specialized equipment like a calibrated radar or LiDAR gun. They have to find a tactical position on the side of the highway to hide.
They have to aim the device, isolate a specific vehicle in a cluster of traffic, acquire a reading, and then pull out into traffic to chase the car down.
Now think about the mechanics of policing a driver under the influence. An officer has to observe a pattern of erratic behavior over time. They initiate a stop based on suspicion. They approach the vehicle to look for physical signs: the smell of alcohol, slurred speech.
They have to convince the driver to exit the vehicle on the side of a dangerous highway. They must conduct standardized field sobriety tests. Finally, they administer a breathalyzer.
It is a highly complex process requiring inference, specialized training, and physical testing. It takes an enormous amount of time and resources to process a single DUI stop.
Conversely, what is required to catch a driver holding a brightly lit 6-inch rectangular screen in front of their face in a dark cabin at 6 p.m. in November?
Or what is required to spot a driver staring straight down at their lap while traveling 50 miles per hour with their right hand entirely detached from the steering wheel?
Nothing. It requires zero specialized equipment. It requires absolutely no inference or prolonged observation.
The behavior illuminates itself. The physical posture of a distracted driver, the downward tilt of the head, the unnatural position of the arm is highly distinct and visible from 20 yards away, even at high speeds.
The friction of enforcement is practically zero.
An officer simply looks out their window, sees the glowing rectangle, and the legal threshold for a primary stop is met instantly.
This synthesizes the entire macro trend. What we are really witnessing with this wave of primary enforcement isn't the policing of new behavior. It's not like drivers in 2025 suddenly decided to start using their phones more than they did in 2022.
No, the behavior was already there.
The state is simply removing the legal friction to penalize a behavior that had already become culturally ubiquitous and, crucially, a behavior that was sitting right out in the open, highly visible to anyone looking.
The behavior had scaled to a point where it was undeniable. The insurance data quantified the resulting damage, and the offense itself was visually obvious to law enforcement.
The law has finally adapted to the reality of the modern cabin.
Operating a 2-ton machine through physical space is one distinct cognitive and mechanical activity. Interacting with a digital interface is a completely separate cognitive and mechanical activity.
The state has definitively decided that these two activities cannot occupy the same physical space at the same time. The primary enforcement laws now live entirely in the boundary between the driver and the device.
Right.
So the boundary has been breached. The officer looks over, sees the phone in your hand at the red light, and hits the siren. The stop is initiated based entirely on that line of sight. But the physical interaction on the roadside, the officer handing you a piece of paper through the window, is only the beginning.
Yes.
We have to move from the legal mechanism to the immediate financial fallout, because this is where the structural shift becomes a permanent reality for the driver.
We're entering the domain of the velocity of consequence. To understand the financial threat of a primary enforcement citation today, you have to completely discard your historical understanding of what a phone ticket means.
Because under the old secondary model, if you somehow managed to get cited for using your phone, it was widely treated as a nuisance penalty. In many jurisdictions, it was classified as a non-moving violation or a very low-level civil infraction.
It felt akin to getting a parking ticket, or a fix-it ticket for having tinted windows that were too dark.
You went online, you paid a nominal fine of $50 or $75, the municipality collected their revenue, and the incident effectively vanished. It rarely hit your driving record in a way that mattered.
That paradigm has been entirely dismantled. Today, under a primary enforcement framework, a distracted driving citation carries immense actuarial weight.
The insurance industry data we are reviewing is definitive on this. These citations are no longer categorized as minor administrative errors. They are now processed by underwriting algorithms similarly to major moving violations.
And more critically, they are heavily weighted as at-fault risk indicators.
Let's define that term for the listener, because an at-fault risk indicator sounds like the kind of phrase an actuary uses to justify taking a lot of money out of your bank account.
That is precisely what it is. It is the behavioral flag. Auto insurance premiums are not based on what you've done in the past. They are priced based on the statistical probability of what you will cost the company in the future.
So they are projecting.
Right. The actuarial algorithms look at massive data sets and conclude that a driver who is willing to physically detach their attention from the road to manipulate a device while in motion is statistically highly probable to be involved in a high-severity at-fault collision in the near future.
They're likely to rear-end someone or drift into oncoming traffic.
Because the nature of the distraction is so complete, you aren't just looking away. Your hands are occupied, and your cognitive focus is captured by the screen.
Therefore, the insurance company cannot wait for the inevitable crash to occur. The risk profile of that specific driver must be aggressively adjusted immediately to reflect the impending liability. You are no longer priced as a safe driver, you are priced as a liability waiting to happen.
And the most vital element of this new reality is the speed at which that pricing adjustment happens. The velocity of consequence has fundamentally changed. The data clearly states that this isn't the slow, bureaucratic penalty curve we used to deal with.
In the past, the communication between municipal court systems, state departments of motor vehicles, and private insurance carriers was sluggish. A traffic violation might take 6 months to propagate through the reporting databases.
Often your insurance carrier wouldn't even see the ticket until you explicitly shopped for a new policy, or until your current policy underwent a major biannual renewal audit. You had a massive lag time between the offense and the financial penalty.
But the modern data architecture doesn't allow for lag. State databases and insurance APIs are highly integrated.
Once that primary citation is entered into the system by the court clerk, it can be electronically polled by insurers, factored into dynamic risk scoring models, and used to strip your safe driver discounts or apply massive premium surcharges within a single billing cycle.
You get the ticket on a Tuesday, and your auto draft premium could spike on the first of the following month.
The speed of the financial consequence is nearly instantaneous. However, the legal citation from the police officer is actually only half of the equation.
Right.
To truly understand why the insurance companies react so aggressively to these specific tickets, we have to look at the invisible data trail that exists long before the patrol car ever turns on its lights.
We are talking about telematics, app-based driving monitors. We have tens of millions of drivers currently participating in programs like DriveSafe or Snapshot or any of the proprietary apps run by the major carriers.
You download the app, you give it permission to run in the background of your phone, and in exchange, the insurance company promises you a potential discount on your premium for being a good driver.
This is the intersection of state law and corporate data collection. These telematics systems use the internal hardware of your smartphone to constantly measure your physical behavior in the vehicle.
They use the GPS to track your speed against posted limits. They use the accelerometer to measure how hard you hit the brakes or how aggressively you accelerate. And they use the internal gyroscopes to track the physical orientation of the device in three-dimensional space.
So let's break down how a smartphone gyroscope actually monitors distracted driving, because it's not just checking if the screen is on.
No, it is measuring spatial movement. The gyroscope measures rotation across the X, Y, and Z axis. If the phone is sitting flat in your cup holder, the app registers a baseline state.
Okay.
But if the phone is suddenly lifted, tilted to a 45-degree viewing angle, and the screen is unlocked, all while the GPS indicates the phone is traveling down a highway at 65 miles per hour, the telematics algorithm registers a highly specific physical event. It registers that the device is being handled in motion.
It tracks the phone handling. This raises a fascinating and frankly kind of terrifying question about how these two systems, the police and the app, interact. If my insurance company's app is already running silently in my pocket, if the gyroscope and the screen lock status already know that I pick up my phone twice a day on the highway, how does the physical ticket from the police officer actually change anything for the insurance company? Don't they already have the data?
They have the data, but the data is legally incomplete. It changes the status of your behavior from probabilistic to confirmed. We have to look at this strictly through the lens of actuarial mathematics.
Okay.
Your telematics app generates probabilistic data. The algorithm sees the phone moving, the screen unlocking, and the GPS speed. It heavily suspects you are a distracted driver. It flags the behavior in your profile. It might quietly erode a small tier of your good driver discount, but there's always an algorithmic margin of error.
Because the phone doesn't have eyes. It only has motion sensors.
Correct. The algorithm cannot definitively prove context. Perhaps you were sitting in the passenger seat of your spouse's car, scrolling through social media. Perhaps you were on a public bus. Perhaps the phone simply vibrated off the center console, fell onto the floor mat, and you quickly reached down to retrieve it, triggering the gyroscope without actually looking at the screen.
So the insurance company has a massive, statistically significant suspicion that you are a dangerous driver, but they lack the definitive objective proof required to implement a punitive 50% rate hike without risking regulatory pushback or losing you as a customer to a competitor.
Precisely. The primary enforcement citation provides the definitive objective proof. The police officer on the side of the road acts as the physical legal validator for the corporate algorithm.
Wow.
The citation confirms what the telematics data has already been quietly suggesting for months. Once the state legally verifies the behavior with an actionable ticket, the algorithmic margin of error is instantly erased. The suspicion becomes a fact.
The ticket is the catalyst.
The ticket is the key turning in the lock. Your risk profile solidifies from potentially distracted to legally confirmed high risk. And once that confirmation hits the API, The pricing models react instantly.
The premium spike that hits your bank account isn't just a penalty for the single mistake you made at the red light that morning. It is the insurer finally pricing in the historical pattern of behavior they already knew you were engaged in, but couldn't legally act upon until the state handed them the proof.
That is exactly how the mechanics work.
We have mapped out the entire architecture of this shift. We started with the foundational legal change, the threshold for intervention dropping from secondary to primary enforcement, completely removing the buffer of a moving violation.
Right.
We defined the ruthless new mechanical standard of hands-free, measuring physical action rather than benign intent, eliminating the gray areas of mounts and stoplights. We examined how the gig economy workflow neutralized this distraction, and how the sheer physical visibility of glowing screens accelerated the state's crackdown.
And finally, we detail the immediate velocity of consequence, where the police citation validates the hidden telematics data, resulting in an immediate financial strike.
The progression is entirely logical and completely unsentimental. The legal apparatus of the state and the financial apparatus of the insurance industry have aligned their architectures to eliminate one specific physical behavior from the driver's seat.
Which brings us to the synthesis of this entire deep dive. We have to bring this massive structural analysis down to the practical reality for you, the person listening to this right now. Tomorrow morning, you have to get in your car and merge onto the highway.
The reality you're driving into is stark. The grace period is completely gone.
The ambiguity has evaporated. The system that allowed you to rationalize a quick swipe at a stoplight or a single tap to change a GPS route no longer exists in the eyes of the law. Your behavior must mathematically align with the new architecture, or you will be penalized.
The required protocol is remarkably rigid. The physical device goes into the mounted cradle before the transmission is shifted out of park. Your route is pre-selected, your audio is pre-selected, and your physical hand does not breach the plane to touch that device again until the vehicle is parked and the engine is deactivated.
Any deviation from that sequence is an enforceable moment.
We want to leave you with a final, quiet realization to ponder as you look at your dashboard tomorrow morning. For well over a decade, we have viewed the smartphone in the cabin as a tool of ultimate convenience. It routed us around traffic jams, it curated our audio environment, it kept us tethered to our offices and our families while we moved through dead space.
It was designed to serve us.
But in an era defined by primary enforcement, zero-tolerance policies on physical interaction, and immediate integration with insurance telematics, the fundamental nature of that device has changed. The dashboard has quietly transformed from a zone of convenience into a zone of absolute financial and legal exposure.
The physical machinery of your car remains exactly the same, but the rules governing your interaction with it have been permanently and expensively rewritten.
That is the mechanical reality of the road today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Drive safely.